The first phone call I made after my son's wedding wasn't to congratulate him, it was to a lawyer. The second was to the best real estate agent in the county. On the very night he pledged forever to his new wife, under the glow of 1,000 fairy lights, I began the process of dismantling the entire world I had spent 30 years building for him. My name is David, and this is the story of how I lost a son but found myself. You might think this sounds cruel, but what I'm about to tell you will likely change your mind. The truth is far colder than you can imagine. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions about this story in the comments. It all started with a quiet request, spoken at his lavish wedding reception, a request that felt like a knife twisting slowly in my chest. That night, I sat alone in my worn armchair, the one my late wife Eleanor and I bought with our first savings. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. My son wanted me gone. He wanted a clean slate. And in that dark, quiet moment, I decided to give it to him. But it would be on my terms, not his. Before that wedding, before the music died and my world tilted on its axis, my life ran on a rhythm as predictable as the sunrise. My days began at 5 a.m., in the quiet dark of the house I'd shared with Eleanor. The first sound was the old coffee pot gurgling to life, a sound that was more comforting to me than any song. The aroma of dark roast coffee would fill the small kitchen, mingling with the faint, lingering scent of lemon polish Eleanor used on the oak table. I'd sit there, at that very table, and watch the light creep over the rooftops of our quiet neighborhood. This house wasn't just wood and nails, it was a living album of our lives. In the doorframe between the kitchen and the living room, pencil marks still tracked Mark's height, from a scruffy-headed 3-year-old to a lanky teenager who towered over me. The final mark, at 6 feet 1, was dated June 15, 2012, the day he graduated high school. I ran my thumb over it sometimes, feeling the graphite embedded in the painted wood, a fossil of a time that felt 1,000,000 miles away. My sanctuary within that house was the living room, specifically the old burgundy armchair. Its leather was cracked and worn smooth in the places where Eleanor and I had sat, first together, and then, after she was gone, just me. It was the chair where I'd read bedtime stories to Mark, his small body curled against my side, his breathing slowing as he drifted off to sleep. It was where I'd waited up for him on the night of his first prom, a knot of anxiety in my stomach until I saw his headlights sweep across the driveway at exactly 1 a.m., the curfew we'd agreed on. Every stain, every scuff on that chair told a story. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was the silent witness to my entire life as a father. It had absorbed 30 years of my worries, my pride, and my profound, unending love for that boy. After my coffee, I'd walk the 2 blocks to Miller & Son Auto. The "and son" part was added the day Mark was born, a promise I made to his future. The garage was my second home. The smell that hit you at the door was a unique perfume of motor oil, gasoline, and vulcanized rubber, a scent most people find harsh. But to me, it was the smell of honesty. It was the smell of hard work, of providing. My hands, permanently calloused and stained with grease that no soap could fully remove, were a testament to that life. I knew every tool by its weight and balance, the specific clang of a 1/2-inch wrench hitting the concrete floor. This was the place I'd taught Mark how to check his oil, how to change a tire. I can still see him at 10 years old, his face smudged with dirt, struggling with a lug wrench almost as big as he was. When the nut finally broke free with a loud crack, the look of pure, unadulterated pride on his face was worth more than any paycheck. That was the foundation I thought I was building on. Shared work, mutual respect, a legacy passed from father to son. I never took vacations. My last real trip was my honeymoon with Eleanor in 1987. After she passed, every cent went to Mark. When he wanted to go to the state university, I didn't hesitate. I worked 60-hour weeks for 4 years straight, paying the tuition directly, a total of $58,240, so he could graduate without a single dollar of debt. When he got his first real job, he needed a reliable car. I found a 3-year-old Honda Accord, solid and safe, and paid the $17,500 in cash. I never told him the exact figures. I just told him it was taken care of. Seeing him succeed was all the reward I needed. I didn't need fancy trips or a new truck. My joy came from seeing him have the opportunities I never did. I thought he understood the silent contract between us. My sacrifice was his foundation. The first crack in that foundation appeared when he met Sarah. It wasn't anything she said or did. Not at first. It was a subtle shift in Mark. He started calling the house dated. He'd wrinkle his nose at the smell of my work clothes. "Dad, you could really modernize the garage," he'd say, gesturing vaguely. "Franchise, maybe. Get out from under the cars." He didn't see the pride in my work anymore. He saw limitation. He stopped talking about the "and son" on the sign and started talking about branding and market appeal. The boy who was once so proud of changing a tire now seemed embarrassed by the grease under his father's fingernails. He was looking at my life's work not as a legacy to inherit, but as an asset to be liquidated. I see that now, of course. But at the time, I told myself he was just ambitious. I told myself he was just growing up. I didn't want to believe the son I raised, the boy whose height I'd marked on the doorframe, was slowly erasing me from the picture he was painting of his own future. The wedding was still 6 months away, a date circled in red on the calendar hanging by the phone, September 14th. But the changes started long before the invitations were even printed. They began as small ripples. Sarah would come over for Sunday dinner, a weekly tradition Eleanor had started, and her eyes would scan the living room not with warmth, but with the cool, appraising gaze of an inspector. "This wallpaper is very vintage, David," she said once, tracing a faded floral pattern with a perfectly manicured nail. Mark, who used to love that wallpaper because it reminded him of his mother, just shrugged. "Sarah's got a great eye for design, Dad." I'd try to steer the conversation back to familiar ground. I'd ask Mark about the garage, about a tricky transmission job on a '68 Mustang we'd both admired. He used to light up talking about engines. Now his eyes would glaze over. "It's fine, Dad." Same old stuff. Then he'd turn to Sarah, and their talk would shift to things that felt alien in my home. Stock portfolios, weekend trips to wine country, the outrageous cost of their wedding photographer. $8,000 for a single day's work. I once spent less than that on a new hydraulic lift for the garage, an investment that would serve me for 20 years. They were spending it on pictures. I'd just nod, stirring my coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic mug Eleanor had painted for me one Christmas. The sound felt lonely. The first real Fisher appeared on a Tuesday evening in April. Mark stopped by the garage after work, not in his usual jeans, but in a tailored suit that made him look like a stranger. He didn't come to the back where I was wrestling with a stubborn engine block. He stood by the front office, avoiding the grease-stained floor. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, his tone clipped and professional. He and Sarah had been running the numbers for a down payment on a house after the wedding. "My house." "We were looking at the comps in this neighborhood," he continued, pulling out his phone. "Houses on this street are going for over $450,000. It's crazy." He looked at me, a hopeful yet demanding glint in his eye. "If you were to, transfer the title to me before the wedding, we could use the equity to secure a much better mortgage rate. It would be a huge help." I wiped my hands on a rag, the rough fabric scratching my knuckles. I looked around the garage, at the calendar with a pinup girl from 1998, at the stack of invoices held down by a heavy metal piston. This was my life's work, and he was talking about it like it was just a number on a screen. "The house is your inheritance, Mark. It will be yours one day," I said, my voice quiet. He sighed, a gust of impatient air. "One day isn't now, Dad. We're trying to build a life. Sarah's parents are giving them a substantial cash gift, $50,000. This would be your way of contributing." The word, contributing, hung in the air, thick and oily. I had contributed my entire life. I had paid for his college, his car, his everything. He was asking me to give him his inheritance while I was still alive, not as a gift, but as a transaction to keep up with his new in-laws. I saw Sarah's influence all over it. The language, the entitlement. It was the first time I felt like he was no longer my son, but her partner in a business venture where I was the primary asset to be liquidated. The most cutting moment, the one that truly chilled me, came about a month before the wedding. I was in the living room, sitting in my burgundy armchair, looking at a framed photo of Eleanor on the mantelpiece. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Sarah walked in, holding two paint swatches, one a sterile gray, the other a cold, lifeless beige. "David, which one do you think for this room?" she asked, not looking at me but at the wall behind me. "We're thinking of getting rid of all this dark wood." "And that chair." She paused, her lips pursed in distaste. "It's just so bulky. It really dates the space." I clutched the worn leather arms of the chair, the place where my wife and I had dreamed of our future, where I had held our son. It wasn't just a chair, it was my last tangible connection to the life we'd built. Mark walked in behind her and put an arm around her shoulder. "She's right, Dad. It's time for a fresh start." He looked at the photo of his mother, then back at the wall. He didn't even seem to see me. In his eyes, I was already gone. The house was already theirs. My chair, my memories, my very presence. We were all just clutter, dating the space. I didn't argue. I just sat there, the silence in the room growing heavier than any words I could have spoken. And in that silence, I understood. They weren't building a life with me. They were planning to build it on top of me. The wedding reception was held at a sprawling country club, the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting a warm, golden light over tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a delicate, elegant hum that felt a universe away from the clang of metal and the hiss of an air compressor that composed the soundtrack of my life. I watched Mark move through the crowd, a glass of champagne in his hand, his arm draped possessively around Sarah. He looked happy, confident, a man stepping into a future I had worked my whole life to give him. A lump of pride formed in my throat, thick and hard to swallow. For a moment, all the sacrifices, the 60-hour weeks, the lonely nights in the quiet house, it all felt worth it. My hand went to the inside pocket of my best suit, the one I'd bought for Eleanor's funeral. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cool surface of a small, polished mahogany box. It was no bigger than my palm. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were two documents, folded with painstaking precision. The first was the deed to the house, the one Eleanor and I had poured our hearts into, the one where Mark's height was still etched into the doorframe. The second was the title to Miller & Son Auto, free and clear of any debt. It was my entire world in a box, my legacy. I had planned to give it to him during the father-son dance, a quiet, private moment. My final gift. My ultimate act of love. Later, as the evening wore on, and the guests grew louder with wine and celebration, Mark found me standing by a large window overlooking the golf course. "Dad," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. It was a practiced political smile. "Sarah and I have been talking about your wedding gift to us." This was it. My heart swelled. "I have something for you, son," I began, my hand moving back toward my pocket. He held up a hand, stopping me. "No, Dad, it's not that. We don't need more stuff. We have more toasters and blenders than we know what to do with." He laughed, a short, sharp sound with no real humor in it. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for a difficult business negotiation. "The greatest gift you could give us is a clean slate." The words hung in the air between us, confusing and out of place amidst the joyful noise. "A clean slate? I don't understand, Mark." He glanced over his shoulder, as if to make sure Sarah wasn't listening, though I had the distinct feeling she was the author of every word he was about to say. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We want you to sell the garage, Dad. And the house. Liquidate it all. Then you could move. Florida, maybe. Arizona. Somewhere warm. You could retire. Play golf." He said it all with an air of generous concern, as if he were offering me a paradise I'd never dreamed of. I just stared at him, my mind struggling to process the request. Sell the garage. My name, my father's name, was on that sign. Sell the house? Eleanor's roses were still blooming by the front porch. He must have seen the confusion on my face, because his expression hardened, the thin veil of kindness dissolving. "Look, Dad. he said, his voice now laced with an impatience I knew all too well. "It's our time now. We want to start our own life, our own traditions. We can't do that with, you know." He made a vague, dismissive gesture that seemed to encompass my worn suit, my calloused hands, my entire existence. "With all this hanging over us, your life, it would give us the space we need to be our own family. A fresh start." The music from the quartet seemed to warp and fade into a low, discordant drone. The air in my lungs turned to ice. A single, searing image flashed in my mind. Eleanor, her face pale against a hospital pillow, her voice a fragile whisper. Asterisk. "Promise me, David. Promise you'll always take care of our boy." I looked at my son, this polished stranger in a tuxedo, and I didn't see the boy I'd raised. I saw only the cold, sharp ambition of his new wife reflected in his eyes. He wasn't asking for a gift. He was serving me an eviction notice from my own life. He wanted to erase me. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My throat was a knot of concrete. My body felt hollowed out, a fragile shell. I simply looked at him, at the son I no longer recognized, and gave a single, slow nod. Then I turned and walked away. I walked past the smiling guests, past the string quartet, past the towering five-tiered wedding cake. I walked out of the grand hall, through the heavy oak doors and into the cool night air, leaving the sound of their perfect new life behind me. The drive home was a silent movie. Streetlights smeared across the windshield like yellow paint. The engine a low hum that did nothing to fill the cavernous quiet in my head. I don't remember parking the car or walking up the path. The first thing I truly registered was the click of the front door closing behind me, sealing me inside the house that suddenly felt like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. The air was still and smelled of old books and lemon polish. Eleanor's scent. Tonight, it wasn't a comfort. It was an accusation. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the dark living room and sank into the deep, welcoming leather of the burgundy armchair. But it didn't feel welcoming. For the first time, its familiar shape felt foreign, as if the chair itself knew I no longer belonged. My body was numb, a heavy, useless thing. But my hand, almost of its own accord, moved to my jacket pocket. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth wood of the small mahogany box. The gift. The legacy he had so casually, so cruelly, rejected. I pulled it out, its weight feeling immense in my trembling palm. With deliberate, almost painfully slow movements, I lifted the lid. There they were, nestled on the black velvet, the two documents that represented 30 years of sweat, sacrifice, and love. My eyes focused on the crisp, official-looking paper of the house deed. I expected to feel a fresh wave of pain, a final, crushing blow. Instead, something else happened. My gaze fell upon the line that read owner. And there, in clear typed letters, was my name. David Miller. I picked up the second document, the title to Miller & Son Auto. The same. David Miller, sole proprietor. The transfer papers I had prepared were still waiting for my final signature, tucked away in a file cabinet. He hadn't asked for the gift, so he hadn't received it. It was so simple, so final. A strange and profound calm washed over me, extinguishing the fire of my grief. It wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity. The shock and the hurt didn't disappear. They coalesced, hardening from a chaotic storm into a single, solid point of focus. I was not a relic to be cleared away. I was not a line item on their financial plan. I was the man who had built all of this. He wanted a clean slate? Fine, he would get one. But it would be a slate wiped clean of everything he had taken for granted. He saw a tired, sentimental old man, an emotional obstacle to be managed and discarded. He and his new wife had no idea. They couldn't possibly imagine what was coming. Because they weren't dealing with the victim, they were about to deal with the man who owned it all. The Monday morning after the wedding, I woke up at 4:59 a.m., 1 minute before my alarm. The silence in the house was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a home at rest. It was the sterile silence of a waiting room. I didn't make coffee. Instead, I sat in the dark at the oak table and opened a small black notebook. On the first page, I wrote the date, September 16th, 2024. Then I wrote 2 names. The first was Arthur Vance. He wasn't a family lawyer, he was a corporate litigator, a man known for dismantling partnerships with surgical precision. I'd fixed his Mercedes S-Class a few years back, and I remembered the cold, analytical way he spoke about contracts and loopholes. He was exactly what I needed. At precisely 8:01 a.m., I dialed his office. His assistant put me through immediately. "David," he said, his voice crisp. "Engine trouble again?" "No, Arthur," I replied, my own voice steady, devoid of the emotion that had hollowed me out less than 48 hours before. "I need to liquidate my assets. All of them. And I need to do it cleanly and quietly." There was a brief pause on the line. "I see," he said, the 2 words carrying no judgment, only professional interest. "Let's meet. My office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Bring every piece of financial paper you own." The second name in my notebook was Susan Gable. Her face was plastered on. "For sale." Signs all over the county. She was known for quick, high-value sales. Her call was even shorter. "Susan, this is David Miller from Miller & Son Auto. I need a formal appraisal on my residential property at 114 Elm Street. And a separate commercial valuation for the garage on 3rd and Main." She didn't ask why. She just said, "I can be at the house on Wednesday at 9 a.m., and I'll have my commercial guy meet us at the garage at 11 a.m. Is that acceptable?" It was. I hung up the phone and finally went to the kitchen to turn on the old coffee pot. As the familiar gurgling sound filled the air, I looked at the pencil marks on the doorframe. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing at all. They were just marks on a wall. That day, I went to the garage not to work, but to excavate. I bypassed the half-finished engine job on a Ford pickup and went straight to the dusty back office. For the next 8 hours, I pulled records. Tax returns going back 15 years. The original deed for the property, dated 1989. A thick binder containing every major equipment purchase from the $8 500 hydraulic lift bought in 2005 to the $3 200 diagnostic computer from 2022. I compiled supplier agreements, payroll records, and a detailed client database. The smell of oil and rubber was the same, but my perspective had shifted. I wasn't the man who fixed cars anymore. I was the man who owned the machine that fixed the cars, and I was preparing to sell it, piece by valuable piece. 3 days into their Hawaiian honeymoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark, a picture of him and Sarah, grinning with turquoise water behind them. The message read, "Hey Dad, hope you're doing okay. Place is amazing. Sarah found an upgrade to an oceanfront suite for our last 4 nights. It's a steal at $2,400. Could you transfer the funds? It would make this perfect trip even more perfect. Thanks." I stared at the text. The casual entitlement, the complete lack of awareness, was breathtaking. He wasn't asking if I was all right. He wasn't reflecting on the wedding. He was just a boy asking for an allowance, assuming the Bank of Dad was still open for business. My thumbs hovered over the screen. The old me would have replied, asterisk, "Of course, son, anything for you." But the old me was gone, discarded at a country club reception. I typed back a simple 6-word response. "We will discuss finances when you return." I didn't add an exclamation point or a smiley face. I didn't sign it, Dad. I just sent it. A minute later, a single question mark appeared in response. I put the phone down and didn't answer. On Wednesday, Susan Gable arrived, clipboard in hand, her smile professional and distant. She moved through the house with an efficient, impersonal air, noting the hardwood floors, the age of the roof, the square footage. She paused in the living room. "And this furniture?" she asked. "Will it be staying?" I looked at the burgundy armchair, my fortress of solitude. Its worn leather seemed to sag a little under her gaze. "No," I said, the word coming out easier than I expected. "Everything goes." When she finished, she gave me a preliminary verbal estimate. "Based on current market comps, and assuming it's cleared out, You're looking at a list price somewhere between $460,000 and $485,000. We'd probably get an offer for $475,000 within a week. At the garage, her commercial partner, a man named Henderson, was even more direct. He spent an hour walking the floor, tapping on walls, inspecting the lifts, and reviewing the books I'd prepared. He didn't care about the history or the "and son" on the sign. He saw numbers. "The property alone is worth $250,000, easy," he said, chewing on the end of his pen. "The equipment, even depreciated, is another $40,000. But the real value is the goodwill. 30 years in one spot, a loyal customer base, with your books. I'd value the business as a going concern at $350,000. Maybe $360,000 to the right buyer." That evening, I sat at the oak table, the silence of the house no longer bothering me. In my black notebook, I wrote down the numbers. House, $475,000. Business, $360,000. I subtracted my estimated capital gains tax and fees. The final number at the bottom of the page was a little over $710,000. It wasn't just money. It was 30 years of 5 a.m. mornings, of grease-stained hands, of missed vacations and lonely dinners. It was the price tag of my son's clean slate. And I was about to cash the check. The mahogany box with the unsigned deeds was now in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, buried under a stack of old invoices. Its purpose was served. Mark and Sarah would return in 1 week, expecting to discuss their future, the one they had planned on my foundation. They had no idea the foundation was already sold. The week Mark and Sarah were in Hawaii was the most productive of my life. My days were no longer measured by oil changes and tire rotations, but by a checklist in my black notebook. The plan unfolded with the cold logic of an engine schematic. My meeting with Arthur Vance lasted exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. He sat behind a vast mahogany desk, his office overlooking the city from the 20th floor, a world of silence. The day they were due back, I didn't go to the garage. I stayed home. At 8:55 a.m., Susan Gable's team hammered a sleek, professional "for sale" sign into my front lawn. The sound of the mallet striking the post was a series of sharp, declarative thuds. Each one felt like a sentence in a new chapter. I went back inside and sat at the oak table, a cup of black coffee in my hand, and waited. At 2:17 p.m., a taxi pulled up to the curb. Mark and Sarah got out, tanned and smiling, pulling expensive-looking luggage behind them. Their laughter died the instant Mark saw the sign. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. He pointed at it, turning to Sarah, who just stared, her perfectly shaped eyebrows knitting together in confusion. He stormed up the path, leaving Sarah to struggle with the bags, and burst through the front door without knocking. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and panic. He waved a hand toward the front window. "A for sale sign? Is this some kind of sick joke?" I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering. I looked at him, at his $300 linen shirt and the deep tan that spoke of carefree days spent on my dime. "It's not a joke, Mark," I said calmly. "I'm selling the house." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently for a moment. "Selling it? You can't sell it. This is my house. Our house. This is where I grew up." The word "my" came out so naturally, so possessively, he truly believed it. Sarah came in then, her face a carefully arranged picture of concern. "David," she began, her voice soft and placating, "I think we're all a little emotional. Maybe you misunderstood what Mark was trying to say at the wedding. We just want you to be happy, to enjoy your retirement." I turned my steady gaze on her. "I am planning on enjoying my retirement. That's precisely why I'm selling. The market is excellent. Susan Gable expects an offer over $475,000 within the week." The number, so specific and real, hit them like a physical blow. Sarah's mask of concern slipped, revealing a flash of raw fury. $475,000? She repeated, her voice no longer soft. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his composure completely unraveling. "This is insane. What about our plans? We were counting on the equity. The wedding, the honeymoon, that was all part of building our life here." "Your life," I repeated, my voice even. "You wanted a clean slate, remember? A fresh start. This is it. My assets are mine. Your life is yours to build. My eyes drifted to the living room. The burgundy armchair was gone. In its place was an empty space on the floor, a slightly lighter rectangle on the hardwood where it had sat for 30 years, absorbing the life of our family. Mark followed my gaze, his eyes widening as he noticed the void. "The chair. Where's the chair?" he asked, his voice suddenly smaller, like a child's. "I sold it," I said, "to a collector of mid-century furniture. I got $1.200 for it." He looked as if I'd just confessed to burning down the house. That chair, which his wife had called bulky and he had agreed to discard, was suddenly a priceless heirloom now that it was gone. His panic escalated, turning venomous. "And the garage? Don't tell me you're selling the garage." "The business is already under contract," I stated, a matter of fact. "A national chain made me an offer I couldn't refuse. $380,000. They're rebranding it. The Miller & Son sign comes down on the 1st of the month." That was the final straw. He took a step toward me, his face red with rage. "My name is on that sign. That's my legacy. You're just erasing it. Erasing me!" "You wanted to be erased from my life, Mark," I said, my voice hardening for the first time. "You stood at your own wedding and told me the best gift I could give you was to disappear. I'm just honoring your request." His anger collapsed into a desperate, pathetic plea. "Dad, please, we can't do this without you. Without the house, we have nothing. The down payment, we told the bank it was secured. Sarah's parents gave us $50,000, but it's not enough without this house. You're ruining everything." I thought of the text asking for $2,400 for a hotel upgrade. I thought of the 60-hour weeks, the tuition payments, the car. I thought of the mahogany box he had rejected. I stood up from the table, my joints creaking slightly. I was still an old man, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like one. I felt like the man who owned the board. "Your financial situation is no longer my concern," I said, the words clear and final in the quiet room. "You are an adult, with an ambitious wife. You wanted to start your own family, your own traditions. So start. It's your time now." I walked past them, toward the back of the house, leaving them standing in the entryway of a home that was no longer theirs, surrounded by the ghosts of a life they had willingly thrown away. The silence they left behind was the cleanest slate of all. 2 weeks later, the house was a hollowed-out shell. The moving company I'd hired, a crew of 3 efficient, impersonal men, had packed my entire life into a series of brown cardboard boxes now stored in a climate-controlled unit registered under my name. The only things left were the old oak table in the kitchen and a single folding chair. The walls were bare, showing lighter patches where photos had hung for decades. The silence was absolute, broken only by the echo of my own footsteps on the naked hardwood floors. I was doing one last walkthrough before the final closing, scheduled for the next day. The new owners, a young family with 2 small children, had paid my full asking price of $475,000 in cash. It was a clean, uncomplicated transaction. As I ran my hand over the doorframe, over the faded pencil marks tracking a childhood that now felt like it belonged to someone else, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't need to look. I knew. A moment later, the front door opened and Mark walked in, followed by Sarah. They looked different. The Hawaiian tens had faded, replaced by a pale, drawn exhaustion. Mark's expensive shirt was wrinkled, and Sarah's eyes, usually sharp and appraising, were shadowed with dark circles. They stopped in the entryway, their gazes sweeping over the vast, echoing emptiness of the living room. The scale of what had happened finally seemed to be hitting them in a way the for sale sign never could. Mark took a tentative step forward, his voice uncharacteristically soft, almost pleading. "Dad, we need to talk." He gestured for Sarah to stay back as he approached me, his hands held up in a gesture of peace. "I'm sorry," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. "What I said at the wedding, it was stupid. It was Sarah's parents. The pressure. I wasn't thinking. This house. Your mom loved this house. We can fix this. Just call the agent. Tell them you changed your mind. We'll figure out the money." He was trying to summon the ghost of the boy I once knew, the son who could charm his way out of any trouble. I remained silent, my expression unreadable. I just looked at him, waiting. My silence seemed to unnerve him. He glanced back at Sarah, who now stepped forward, attempting a look of gentle remorse. "David," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness, "Mark is right. We were wrong. This is about family. We want our children to grow up knowing their grandfather. We want to have you over for Sunday dinners, right here in this house." It was a masterful performance. But I had seen the truth behind the curtain. I simply shook my head, a small, final gesture. The sale is final. The closing is tomorrow at 10 a.m. That's when Sarah's mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Her face contorted with a vicious rage that was startling in its purity. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice sharp and ugly. "He is your only son. You have a legal and moral obligation to him. This is his birthright. We've spoken to a lawyer. We will contest this. We will sue you for his inheritance, and we will drag your name through the mud until you have nothing left." The threat hung in the empty room, venomous and impotent. I didn't flinch. I walked slowly to the oak table, where a single worn black notebook lay. I opened it to a bookmarked page. My voice, when I finally spoke, was low and steady, cutting through her shrill anger with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "His inheritance?" I asked quietly, looking directly at Mark. "Let's talk about your inheritance." I ran my finger down a list of entries. State University tuition and board, paid in full from 2013 to 2017, $58,240. A 2017 Honda Accord, your graduation gift, $17,500. A down payment for your first apartment lease in 2018, $5,000. Your wedding at the country club, my contribution, a check for $25,000, cashed on August 12th. The wedding photographer you both insisted on, $8,000. I paused, letting the numbers settle in the dead air. Your inheritance, Mark, wasn't something you were waiting for. It's something I have been giving you with love, your entire adult life. A total of $108,740, given freely, without expectation of anything in return except, perhaps, a little respect. I closed the notebook. The house and the business were never your inheritance. They were my legacy. Something built with your mother. Something I hope to one day share with a son who valued it. But you didn't want a legacy. You wanted liquidity. You stood at your wedding and asked for a clean slate. You said it was your time. You were right. It is. I walked past them, toward a small cardboard box sitting by the front door. The last box. I picked it up. It wasn't heavy. I turned back and held it out to Mark. His hands were trembling as he took it. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. For the first time, he wasn't seeing a bank or an obstacle. He was seeing his father. "This is what's left," I said, my voice softer now, tinged with a finality that was more profound than any anger. "It's all I have left to give you." He fumbled with the flaps and opened the box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were the old framed photos from the mantelpiece, him on his first day of school. Him and me by the '68 Mustang, and on top, a large silver-framed photo of his mother Eleanor, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she smiled. Just pictures. The tangible proof of a love he had cashed in for a dream that had just evaporated. A single, ragged sob escaped his throat. Sarah stood behind him, silent and pale, her fury replaced by the cold, stark realization of absolute defeat. They had lost. I turned, without another word, and walked out the front door, leaving it open behind me. I didn't look back. I left them there, standing in the empty house, holding a box of memories they no longer had a home for. I didn't move to Florida. I didn't move to Arizona. I moved to a small coastal town 200 miles north, a place Eleanor and I had visited once on our honeymoon, a memory I had kept locked away just for myself. My new life began not with a bang, but with the quiet, rhythmic sigh of waves on sand. I live in a small condo now, on the second floor, with a balcony that faces the ocean. The air here smells of salt and clean wind, a world away from the familiar perfume of motor oil and vulcanized rubber that had defined my existence for so long. The first thing I bought for this new, empty space was a chair. It's not a grand burgundy leather throne heavy with the ghosts of 30 years. It's a simple wicker armchair, with a thick, comfortable cushion the color of the sea. It holds no memories of bedtime stories or anxious nights waiting for a teenager to come home. It's just a chair. My chair. A place to sit, drink my morning coffee, and watch the sun burn the fog off the water. It's a place to start over, on my own terms. My days are quiet now. The frantic 5 a.m. starts are gone. I wake with the sun. My hands, still calloused and scarred from a lifetime of labor, are slowly losing the permanent stains of grease from beneath the nails. I took up a hobby I'd forgotten I loved, repairing old clocks. There's a quiet satisfaction in it, in seeing the intricate dance of gears and springs, in coaxing a silent, forgotten thing back to life. It's patient work, just like building a business was, but this time, the work is just for me. The reward is the gentle, steady tick-tock that fills the silence, a sound of time moving forward, not standing still. I have the money from the sales, all $710,000 of it, carefully invested by a man Arthur Vance recommended. But I've found my real wealth is in this peace, in this reclaimed time that is entirely my own. I think of Mark and Sarah sometimes, not with the fire of anger, but with a kind of detached pity. I hear things through the grapevine. A cousin told me they're living in a small rented apartment across town, struggling to make ends meet now that their expected windfall never arrived. I imagine them looking at that box of photographs, the relics of a life they torched for a future that never materialized. I gave them the past, because that's all they seem to value in the end. The image of a family, not the substance of it. I kept the future. It was a fair, if brutal, transaction. That burgundy armchair I sold? It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was the throne of a life spent in service to a legacy they rejected. Its absence is my freedom. My legacy isn't a garage with my name on it, or a house filled with memories. It's this: the quiet dignity of a man who learned, late in life, that the most important thing you can build is a life you are proud to live in yourself. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. Looking out at the ocean from my wicker chair, I've come to understand a simple truth. For 30 years, I thought my legacy was something tangible. A business with my name on it, a house filled with memories. I was wrong. A legacy isn't an inheritance you hand over. It's the dignity you refuse to surrender. My son and his wife didn't see a father. They saw a financial resource to be drained, an obstacle to be removed. The moment I accepted that truth, the power shifted. They thought my love for my son was a weakness they could exploit, but they mistook a lifetime of sacrifice for an absence of strength. The ultimate lesson I learned wasn't about revenge. It was about valuation. You cannot force someone to see your worth. You can only decide what you are no longer willing to sell for their comfort. My peace of mind was not for sale. My self-respect had no price tag. I gave them exactly what they asked for: a life without me in it. In the end, we both got our clean slate. Theirs is a blank page filled with regret and consequences. Mine is this endless horizon and the quiet, steady rhythm of the tide. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.